Hello, I'm Julianne Good, and this is Psych One-on-One. Welcome. We are here to make psychology more understandable. Today, our subject is MidLife Revival and Jungian Psychology. My special guest is Dr. Melody Bacon. Hello, Dr. Bacon.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Great.
Great to be here.
Thank you. Great to have you. Could you tell the audience a little bit about your background and how you got into doing Jungian Psychology?
Sure. Well, I think my biography is probably a good example of Jung's psychology, which is that your life is going to take different twists and turns, and what you thought you were going to do in your 20s is very often very different than what you end up doing in your 40s and 50s. Mm-hmm. And for Jung, I think that was a really important focus of his psychology. So my background, actually, I got my master's degree in Southern American history. Oh. And I was trying to blend Jung's psychology with the study of the American South during Reconstruction, and particularly the myth of the lost cause. Mm-hmm. And then I found a school that focused on the humanities and psychology, Jungian in particular, Pacifica Graduate Institute. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up going and getting my doctorate in depth psychology, and instead of going to the history field, I went and did a little bit of a right turn and ended up at Pacifica in focusing on psychology, and from there became a clinical psychologist, and from there moved into not only private practice, where I focus on transitions in people's lives, particularly relational transitions, but also in administration and in teaching. Mm-hmm. And I think the biggest help to me from Jung's ideas are that this is the way that things should unfold, that it's better to allow life to go through its natural course than trying to force it to go one way or the other, which ends up with rigidity in your life and usually a lot of unhappiness. So even though it can be difficult to think you're going one way and end up in another, in the long run, people are much happier doing that.
Right. And I think nowadays, too, with the shift in the economy, mm-hmm. and a lot of people finding themselves scrambling in their 40s and their 50s of either not having a job or being laid off of a job that they've been at for a while,
right.
that they're almost at a loss of what am I supposed to do now? Mm-hmm. I'm too young to retire, but I need to keep going.
Sure.
So can you speak a little bit on that subject?
Well, Carl Jung really focused on what happens when you encounter a big shift, either externally, which you're talking about in the economy with jobs, or with relationships, with a divorce or death, or something natural as children growing up and leaving home, mm-hmm. or you're coming to the end of a career that you once enjoyed and now all of a sudden it's not so enjoyable and you really want to find something else. Those are all ways in which people can experience a psychological shift, mm-hmm. some more distressing than others. And I think if I could explain for a few minutes a little bit about how Carl Jung looked at our psychology and what he called the psyche. So the psyche is comprised of your conscious self, mm-hmm. which is what we know about us, our thoughts, our, whatever we understand about ourselves. And then our unconscious, which is multi-layered. There's our personal unconscious. Some people may have heard of the collective unconscious, which has to do with our cultural mythologies and stories and attitudes. Mm-hmm. And then the human race is also involved in that. And what he thought was developmentally was you would start out developing your ego, which is your conscious self. And actually, the first part of your life, that's really should be the focus.
So up to about what age and what stage?
I'll say around mid-40s. Mm-hmm. But again, this can be shifted depending on life events, mm-hmm. earlier or later. So the first part of your life, you're developing your career, your relationships, education, maybe having children, all of these things that kind of necessitate your developing a strong foundation for your future. Mm-hmm. And then usually around 40, 45, 50, a lot of that either changes if your children grow up, they're leaving you. Mm-hmm. Maybe your marital relationship is in flux, sometimes ending. And a lot of times things that you used to love or you thought you would do your whole life, you kind of wake up and say, is that all there is? And there was a song a number of years ago called Is That All There Is? And the words, if you ever listen to them, are just perfect because everything is kind of, is this it? Mm-hmm. And it can be very disconcerting because you can't go back, and rekindle what used to be so exciting to you. Mm-hmm. All you can do is say, well, what else is there for me in the future?
So maybe it's been there, done that, I need to do something else. Would you call that stage a midlife crisis stage?
Often it can be a crisis because the ego, which, kind of likes things very spelled out. We generally like things fairly defined, and we kind of at midlife think we've gotten it all figured out. So I happen to teach in a graduate school where a lot of people are in that midlife transition. They've discovered a new career, psychology, and they're excited, but it's also a little off-putting because they've gotten to a certain level of expertise in perhaps accounting or banking, and now they're starting over, and it's a little blow to the ego to be a beginner at something, even though Jung would say, and Buddhists and many religious traditions would say, the beginner's mind is the best mind. It's the most open.
Yes.
Yes.
And I can totally relate to that state. I just received my master's right after my 50th birthday, and I did want to do psychology since I was a teenager. And I had gone through a transition with my career. It was phasing out. It was going overseas. I was making less and less money. And I actually said to myself one day, what do I want to do when I grow up? What do I really want to do? What do I feel passionate about? And it was psychology. Yeah. So it is a little bit scary to be at that stage. But you're right. The beginner's mind is just a beautiful thing. And it just to be open to that process and feeling that renaissance, that revival that we need to go through sometimes, because look at the statistics now for longevity in our lives.
Oh, absolutely.
A lot of people are living into their hundreds now. So how long are we actually going to be working? Are we going to be retiring at 70, 75 in the future? Probably not. If we're in good health, physically, psychologically, I'm sure a lot of us are going to be, doing careers until we're way into our 80s or 90s. Right. And that's probably a good thing. We need to work.
You need to be called into life.
Yes.
And I work with a number of, it happens to be women mostly, who are what we call empty nesters and have had the privilege of not having to have a career or work and earn money. They've worked in other ways for their families. And what's been interesting to me is, one might think working with someone with a major depression is difficult, or anxiety disorders, phobias. We can look at, hoarders and think, how could anybody ever get over that? But I have found that is actually easier to address than someone who is in a stage where they're not quite uncomfortable enough to make a change. They haven't gotten there yet. And because discomfort is what propels you to the next level, and you have to be in enough pain to go through the pain of being a beginner. And so most of these women, I would say I'm about 50-50 with success with assisting some of my female clients in looking and seeing what's next. What do I want to do when I grow up? What do I want to do now that the kids are gone? what's calling me, what's my passion. About half of my clients may get in touch with that, and the other half just default to, I'm not going to try to go there right now, which is fine. But for Jung, the psyche is naturally designed to force you to grow either consciously or unconsciously. Those are your two options. Mm-hmm. So consciously choosing to grow may have its own pain. It's scary signing up for a psychology program and am I going to get clients? Am I going to, how am I going to do this? We don't know. So there's that pain. But the pain of staying where you are can be even more excruciating in some ways, because what will happen is unconsciously you will create situations whereby you have to make a change. Mm-hmm. And that's where you get that midlife crisis. The typical one is a man who throws over his marriage and buys a sports car and gets a girlfriend half his age and runs off into the woods and becomes a carpenter or something. And then one day he wakes up and says, what happened? Mm-hmm. And that's an example of the unconscious kind of saying, you know what, if you're not going to change consciously, I'm going to make you change. Only it's never a good thing. It's like the nuclear option. So, from a Jungian point of view, to embrace the fact that there's something stirring within you. And usually the way people know that is they have a mild depression, let's say, waking up and saying, I'm just not enjoying my life would be an example. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's a little anxiety. I'm starting to become anxious going into work when I used to love it. Mild symptoms like that mean that there's something, I kind of call it your smoke detector. Okay, so you have your smoke detector go off. You have to go and look and see why is it going off. You investigate. Mm-hmm. You don't call the fire department, for example. But neither do you want to ignore it, take the batteries out, which is unfortunately what some of the medications can do, Definitely. And not prescription medications like alcohol can just take the batteries out, so to speak, of your symptom. Maybe it's anxiety. And now you have lost your motivation and you're not going to move forward and you're going to stay stuck, and then your symptom's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so sometimes that's what I see in my practice is people have gone for many years with this kind of limbo situation. They know on some level that they need to make a change, but they're too afraid to until such time as they don't have a choice. I mean, they're suffering a major depression or having panic attacks. So for Jungians, the symptoms are always a message. Something needs to change, and the bigger the symptom, the bigger the change. Mm-hmm. And the biggest one, for example, would be suicidal thoughts, which means your life, you need to change it completely. You need a new life. You just don't want to harm your body in order to get it.
Right. And I had seen recent statistics that the suicidal rate is one of the highest in about the 40 to 50 age category. Mm-hmm. Have you seen that also?
Well, I will say that certainly it'll get higher depending on the gender of the individual. The highest would be a single man with no children in his 60s. The lowest is actually a mother with young children, and then you go in between. So what and that's because their children are kind of their reason for living. They wouldn't do that. Mm-hmm. So mainly what I'm looking at are what's calling you into life. What is getting you out of bed in the morning? That's what I'm trying to assist my clients with. Mm-hmm. And some of the ways we do that is not through the front door, which is your conscious self, because most people say nothing. And I don't know exactly. If they knew, why would they come to see me? Right. So one of the best ways is through the back door, which is through night dreams and fantasies and daydreams. because that's when your unconscious or your conscious self is kind of taking a break, either because you're asleep or because you're just daydreaming. And the unconscious is able to get a little bit more in touch with you and say, what about this or what about that? It's not going to be a linear link. It's going to give you clues, much like a poem does, for example.
So how would you help a client to tap into those dreams and get them to realize those messages that are really important that they need to be paying attention to?
Well, first of all, if somebody has a recurring dream that they, remember, and it's the same one or a similar one over and over, that's a real sign that there's something important here for you. Your psyche's really trying to get your attention. If somebody doesn't recall their dreams, I usually ask them to put a pad of paper by their bed and anything they can recall at all on waking. It doesn't have to be a whole narrative. It could be one thing you remember, a doorway or a train, or you woke up feeling anxious and confused and there were a lot of people, and that's all you remember. But that's all you need, because over time, if you keep doing that, you'll probably start remembering more things, number one. Number two, whoever you're working with to help you assess your dreams will have enough details when you put them all together to kind of get a sense of what's stirring within you.
So it's a pattern of a puzzle, in other words.
It is.
Yeah.
Very much so. But actually, daydreams can be in some ways better than night dreams. For Jung, daydreaming, because there's somewhat of a conscious self available, or can access, a little bit more with a little more authority. The thing is, what we tend to do is dismiss our daydreams. Oh, that's silly, right? And then we shut them off. So what I exhort my clients to do is allow your imagination to go. The irony is I work a lot with people who have panic disorders and phobias, and they have quite the imagination. That's part of the problem. And yet when I ask them to use that same imagination for a positive thing, it's not real. Well, neither is the thing you just got yourself panicked over. Your house is going to go on fire if you don't lock the door 10 times in a row. So, but the ability to imagine whatever you want, first of all, can be just a relief in and of itself. There's no rules of right or wrong, and the ego usually is living always within that tension. And you can allow whatever to come up, and write it down. You can draw it. Anything that accesses your non-preferred way of being. So if you're normally verbal, writing or drawing is a better way to access your unconscious. And just doing that, even if you never interpret it, can be quite a relief. Because, again, Jung felt that the psyche is going to bring you naturally to where you need to be if you let it. You don't have to go into analysis or psychotherapy, even though it does help to do that. I mean, I wouldn't do what I do unless I thought that was helpful. But we've all known of people who maybe were kind of rigid and kind of Scrooge-like as young people, and then they got mellow and nicer growing older. That's an example of what naturally can happen. Not always.
But hopefully that would be nice.
Right. And that's someone who's integrated things
exactly
in their own way without them being aware of it.
Just that natural progression of the life stages, and letting more of life happen, and realizing at certain points that you look back and you try to not look back with regrets.
Right.
I think that's probably one of the most significant parts of being over 40, over 50. You start looking at life a little differently and putting things into perspective.
Hopefully, yeah, that you're able to have some compassion for yourself.
Yes, forgive yourself.
So part of what you're doing when you're working from a Jungian perspective is you see the ego as one part of your psyche, but not the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And as such, sometimes you can step away and see your younger self and give yourself a break, give yourself some slack. I always say, that we wish that when we were looking in the future, we had a floodlight and we could see everything, but we don't. We have a little pen light, like the kind that you have to open your doors or something at night on your keychain. That's about all you get. So you maybe a few steps in front of you can see, but you can't see beyond that until you get there. And so a lot of times what people will do is get there and say, oh, I should have known this. How could you have?
Or this isn't what I expected, right?
And that's true too. But at least all you knew was I took the steps that were in front of me that I thought were the best ones to take. Mm-hmm. Really, that's all anybody can say they did.
Right.
And the rest is not in your control.
Mm-hmm. So if the audience would like to contact you, how can they do so?
Well, if you're interested in doing Jungian psychotherapy, you can contact me at my private practice, Relationship Visions Inc., all one word. And you can also email me at drmbacon, drmbacon@cox.net. I also have a office phone, 949-488-8990. So that's Relationship Visions Inc. And my husband and I are in practice together, and kind of, as the name says, we really look at relational issues. And it doesn't have to be, partners. It could be kids or your boss, or, there's always a relational component, I think, to every struggle that we have.
Yes, there is.
And sometimes it's the relationship with our own self, where I have to start.
Yeah, sometimes that could be the most challenging,
oh,
right?
Absolutely. I can attest to that.
Yes, me too.
Yeah.
So Dr. Melody Bacon, thank you so much for being my
You're
guest
welcome.
on Psych
Thanks
1-on-1.
for having me.
And thank you so much for viewing Psych 1-on-1 on therapycable.com. I'm Julianne Good, wishing you good mental health.